About two topics today that I was not planning on talking about until this morning. They came to me, they hit, continuing the theme of law enforcement and freedom, and that is the reproducibility crisis, if you've heard of that, or especially if you haven't. And the other thing is, heck, I just typed it 30 seconds ago. It was, oh yes, the field of forensics. And both of those things are very horrible stories in our nation's history. So first of all, when you hear forensics, you're watching all of these TV shows. By the way, TV is used to brainwash you. In case you didn't notice, it's meant to tell you how things are in the world. TV and movies that are the exact opposite of how they are. Why do you think that Matthew 24 says so many times, be not deceived, don't be deceived? Now is the universal time of great deception. Anyway, you watch all the TV shows and you've got the police on there and they say, okay, well, we found a thread, we found a hair, we found, right? Now, this isn't nowadays, probably, because nowadays they're talking about DNA all the time. But back then, say 70s and 80s and 90s, they were looking for forensic evidence. In other words, how do we connect someone to the crime and know that they did it because they left a random hair or a piece of something at the site, right? Well, the interesting thing came out. I don't know why this wasn't more widely reported, but the evidence came out that the entire field of forensic analysis was completely invented from scratch, from whole cloth. In other words, they would claim, oh, we know that these people did something and we have evidence to prove it because, but actually it was complete nonsense. There was no evidence. They didn't know who did it. And they just said, okay, we'll take a random black man off the street and they'll put them in jail. Now, the biggest one of these, although it was not forensic because they got confessions, 5 signed and spoken confessions from all 5 young men. I'm talking about the Central Park 5 involved in the absolutely horrific assault and rape and let me make sure I get my details totally correct. All right. Oh, raping, yeah, okay. Raping and assault, right? 5 of raping this woman in Central Park, right? The Central Park 5. These 5 boys, black boys, get arrested by the police, and they all confess. We did a. She got assaulted. She was in a coma, so she was not able to testify. And they got signed confessions from all of these young men, after which they went to prison. Okay. And then a few years later, someone else confessed to actually committing the crimes. So how's that? How is it that you get men to say that, confess to, agree that they actually raped someone when they weren't involved at all? And if you understand how that works and how the criminal justice system works, and if you've watched the video on YouTube, I highly recommend it, called Never Talk to the Police, because this is exactly what happens. They've had, in fact, in this the video Never Talk to the Police, the lawyer talks about how they've had mentally incompetent people confess to crimes that they could not possibly have committed and go to prison for it, right? Because the police find someone, of course, justice wants to be served, the community is upset, someone was hurt or killed, and there's no way to figure out who it is. We would think nowadays that we could stop all crime by the fact that the intelligence agencies are gathering every bit of data that exists anywhere at any time, but they're not interested in that, right? In fact, they use sexual crime in order to push their agenda and in order to accomplish what they want. They will entrap people, have them sleep with underaged children, youth, right? And then they will use that evidence to put someone in their pocket and to have them obey them from that time forward. What a great system. What a great society. And so they are not terribly interested in stopping these things, even though they have all the technology to do it. But say 70s and 80s, there was no evidence. There was no way to figure out, okay, who did it? How do we know who did it? How are we going to find them? And so they would just find anyone. Okay, this guy, he's probably done a bunch of stuff. Maybe he has a record. Maybe he doesn't come from a good neighborhood. Maybe he's not that educated. And we're just going to pin it on him. We're going to say, you left your threads at the event. You left a piece of hair, whatever. Well, it's come out that virtually none of this was true. They couldn't find from a thread or a piece of hair or whatever. It didn't mean anything. So the complete field of forensics was just made up, and it was complete nonsense. And so with that and the coercive techniques employed upon all sorts of unsuspecting people to get them to confess to crimes that they'd never committed, we have this swelling prison population that was the largest in the world, I think even greater than / rivaling China's, and with a far smaller population, right? Okay, so again, back to, I have to find myself once in a while. Yes. So now DNA evidence is exonerating these people, but for decades we ran as if forensics was a thing, as if it was true, as if they could find criminals from it, when in reality it didn't tell them anything about anyone or anything, right, about the crime. Okay, second topic that I want to talk about, and I might be a little shorter this time, is the reproducibility crisis in science. And this is especially valuable as flu season has been here for 2 solid years. And it's all based on science that comes from somewhere. Well, the question is, where did that science come from? So the reproducibility crisis means that studies, especially studies in social sciences, especially those studies in those places where they want to determine how people are behaving or why they're behaving or what's aberrant behavior or right or wrong or good or bad, right? So when that was happening, they did a number of research studies. Nowhere except in medicine did they tell you, oh, did something happen and that didn't match your experience? Oh, well, that's just anecdotal. Whatever we said is the truth because we've conducted research and the research is facts. And these anecdotes you can throw away because they're just anecdotal. In other words, they're stories. Like I said, our entire society is based on stories. And but the stories don't match what you'll excuse me. All right. The stories don't match what we tell you should be experiencing. All right, cool. So, in that case, don't believe the story, but believe what we tell you. So they're saying that anecdotal doesn't fit for anything outside of what they tell you it can fit for. So if someone took a poison or got a and they died, took a medicine and then they died, you're not allowed to say, hey, did they die from the medicine? Well, no, that's anecdotal. The story happened and we can't count on the story, right? We don't know what the truth is or everything around it. Now, imagine this. How are you going to test when you give a medicine? All right, I feel a tangent coming on. You give a medicine. You want to know, is it effective? Is it ineffective? Is it good? Is it bad? How are we going to find out? So how do you test it? Well, we have been conditioned to think that testing with medicine, testing with drugs, testing with behavioral things is just the same as scientific testing. The same as testing that, well, if you drop a rock from a high place, is it going to fall at the same speed each time or not, right? So these are the questions that we ask ourselves. In science, if we mix these things together, is this the result? In chemistry, right? And so they tell you and they treat you as if this is some sort of scientific thing that you can do with people. All right, we're going to give people this drug. Well, what are all the inputs and outputs out of a human body? Write them all down. Like what are they? And how do you know that the people that you're getting are comparative and the same? It's so funny because Pfizer is now complaining. All right, I'm sure this video is going to get blocked on YouTube now. Oh, well, sorry, YouTube. We'll post it somewhere else. Is complaining because they want something like 800,000 pages of data that they gathered to somehow create a vaccine in super fast time. They want that all blocked, and they asked for it to be blocked till, geez, when was it? They asked. It's like 2099 or something like that. They wanted 30 years to do this, right? Or no, they wanted like 75 years to do it. They wanted till almost the year 2100 to do this. And so first of all, my question is, who read the 800,000 pages to determine good, bad, right, wrong as far as this vaccine, right? That it's going to be helpful or not in this record time. And so somehow you're able to look at 800,000 pages of data and make a decision to put a novel substance into everyone's bodies, and that's okay, but we can't reveal that data to you for 75 years. And who read it? You know, how can they evaluate 800,000 pages of information? Which is, like I said, how does our legal system work? Well, it works through tens of thousands of pages where everyone's a criminal if they want to make them a criminal for something, right? Depressing, not happy. Anyway. But the reproducibility crisis, going back to the beginning, reproducibility crisis means this. It means that when we went back, when we took any study about the soft sciences, social sciences, drugs, whatever, and someone said, okay, here's the results that you got. By the way, how did you get those results in the first place? They were bought by a pharmaceutical company, guaranteed, who funded it, or the government or the state. So, and if you still trust the state, again, I don't know what to do, but like, all the money goes in the National Institutes of Health. Everyone's trying to get grants, right? You've heard these grants. They say, well, we're studying the mating patterns of snails or whatever. Everyone says, well, that's so stupid. What are they doing? Well, there's a reason that the money is going where it's going, and it's not because it's logical or it's rational. It's to exert a certain measure of social control. And so they will do these, they will fund these studies and get a specific result, and a study is very expensive to do and takes a lot of work. So it's not like people can just randomly hold studies about whatever without the funding to do so, because in studies, again, your anecdotal evidence doesn't work. Whatever you thought was your result or your basic level or your, that doesn't apply anymore. And so what they found is when they started actually doing these studies again, so they said, okay, we determined that this drug has this result, or this type of therapy will give this particular result. What they found is when they started to copy the study, in other words, they opened it up, okay, you had 8 women, 5 men volunteers, okay, we're going to get 8 women, 5 men, and then this is how you did the placebos, this is how you did the dosing, this is how you did everything else, and they copied it exactly, precisely, right? They copied the exact process that was used by those who claimed to get a specific result in this scientific test. Well, what they found out was they couldn't reproduce it. In other words, they were getting completely different results than were originally claimed, which should make ears peak. Yeah, if I Google this, reproducibility crisis. Is it there? Yeah, an ongoing the replication crisis. It's an ongoing methodological crisis in which it has been found that the results of many scientific studies are difficult or impossible to reproduce. Right. So in other words, every time we do the study again, we get completely different results. Well, how are we going to trust that? And then the top, if you go to Replication Crisis in Wikipedia, and what's showing is 2005, why most published research findings are false. Now imagine that. These are the people who are saying, this is how we're building society. These are the decisions we're going to make. This is how we're going to do it. And they are claiming that most published research findings are false, right? In other words, all of this research, all of this money, all of this effort, all of this time, all of this focus, all of this attention that's being given to people to figure out this, to figure out how best to run society, basically, which drugs to make, which therapies to make, how to, that it's all actually wrong. It's all actually bad. It's all actually incorrect, right? Well, what does that mean, right? If all of the research that we're doing that is steering society, I mean, think about the huge, huge investments and power to say, okay, we know how the climate works and you're destroying it because you're a carbon-based life form, or all the big political movements. Well, we shouldn't use coal anymore, and we should use these drugs and give them to children so that they behave. And all of these methods of science are not legit. They're not real, right? They don't really work. Okay, now what? If it's not true, if it doesn't work, what do we do now? Because we're basing all of society on this. We're basing our decisions about everything on whether these findings are true or false or correct or incorrect or right or wrong or good or bad, right? And since we can't duplicate it, we can't prove it, that means that pretty much every foundation that society is built on, that Western society, that civilization is built on, is lies, is incorrect, is wrong. Great. Okay, I'll finish reading a little bit from Wikipedia. Because the reproducibility of empirical results is an essential part of the scientific method. Again, like I said, you can't isolate for all variables in humans because every human's different and every human has various different inputs and outputs that cannot be controlled in a study. By the way, I don't know if they're doing it now, but they didn't even test men versus women, the effects of a drug, for a long time, right? Much less different races have different effects that happen from drugs. In other words, you would have to test men, women, every age, every race, and then think about it. You're testing drugs on human beings. You're testing something that you don't know what it's going to do to their systems once you start giving it to them. They actually had to break off, and they lied about a bunch of the stuff from now. But yeah, if you want to ask me about the flu stuff, that's a completely different topic, and that's related and goes very deep, but I'm just trying to present the overview. It says the replication crisis is frequently discussed in relation to psychology and medicine, where considerable efforts have been undertaken to reinvestigate classic results to determine both their reliability and, if found unreliable, the reasons for the failure. Data strongly indicate that other natural and social sciences are affected as well. Now, never mind that you can't actually do what they're saying you can do, because again, they didn't have all the tests separated by age, sex, race, whatever, right? But that even when even the results that they had, even the limited results that they have in psychology, in medicine, in these new bedrocks, and as some people see those parts of the world that are worshipped in our world, medicine is now running everything. If medicine says you stay home, you stay home. If medicine says you don't go to church, you don't go to church. If medicine says you obey this guy in Washington, D.C., then you obey this guy in Washington, D.C., right? They make whatever rules they want. If you have to be 6 feet away from people, you're 6 feet away. Like, if we want to quarantine people, and in Australia and Canada already put them in these camps and lock them down, and then they try and escape, and it's something out of a horror movie, then that's what we're going to do. And if we're going to put boots on the faces of people because they're questioning the medical science, well, all right. Well, now we know that all of this medical trauma and diatribe and pain and suffering and all of that has been inflicted upon society, not just in the last 2 years, but in general, But look at the number of shots that kids get and how they're always expanding, and then look at the effects of those shots and look at the health of children. And I mean, look at the anecdotal evidence. Look at society. Like I said, it's collapsing. It's ending. It's almost over, right? And one reason is the replication crisis. And of course, why is this so powerful? Well, it would be bad enough if it was just people chasing money. And so, you know, if Pfizer asks you to do a study and they want a specific result, then you better, at least if you have results that are inconclusive, just bend it a little bit so that you get the result they want. That's what happened to Prozac. Apparently, the data for Prozac say it doesn't help at all. In fact, there's suicide warnings on Prozac. Why are we giving people a antidepressants that have suicide as possible side effects? Right. So, but the data was bent enough to get that approved, and then a whole bunch of other antidepressants, which, okay, jury may be out, but there were a lot of ways of dealing with these things before they were outlawed by modern medicine, and before this medical system that said, well, we have science, we have real science, therefore you have to believe us and not believe anything about feeling good or having flowers or human touch or any of these things that are truly healing. We're just going to completely disavow and de-evaluate them. And now we're finding that everyone that we trusted to come up with our ideas about how to run society and what to do, they're actually stuck in this replication. That's an easier word to say. Replication crisis. And what they believe about things. And this is, well, let me give you one example that just hit me. The Stanley Milgram experiment. If you've heard about it, a bunch of volunteers were asked, okay, would you please shock this person to death because they're not obeying? Okay. And so these, they put people in a laboratory and they said, okay, you're going to be giving electric shocks. They're going to be getting more and more intense, and they may go up to death. And, you know, just go ahead and do it. And so the person who was testing just encouraged it. And then there was an actor on the other side who acted as if he was getting electrocuted, right? So this is always used as an example for, well, people will obey and they will do whatever someone in authority tells them to do. And people are basically bad and don't have their own moral compass, etc., etc. Well, what someone figured out, and this is told in every psychology department in the world, in every United States, you know, this is a standard thing that everyone talks about, that they teach, that the Milgram experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, and a bunch of data about why human beings are just horrible, nasty, wrong, and brutish, and how they will do evil things on command. Well, somebody went and looked at all of Stanley's experimental data. And what they found out was he did the experiment in probably 40 or 50 different ways. And as he did that experiment in 40 or 50 different ways, what he found out was that sometimes no one would shock anyone at all. No one would obey at all. Sometimes people would, depending on what was said. It was dependent on what happened. And so this is something that's very interesting. If you run multiple studies and you get a specific information, then what happens if you don't get the information you want, if you don't get the result you want? Well, you just commission another study and another study and another study, and you tweak it a little bit each time until you get the results you want. So if Stanley's point was to, and I don't know what it was, but if it was to say that humans are brutes and they're violent and they're corrupt and they hurt each other very easily with just some mild authority figure telling them so, which, judging from what I said yesterday about police standing on a naked woman's head or kneeling on a naked woman's head in New Zealand, seems to be the case. But if that's true, then we're going to see that result. But if he has to do the experiment 40, 50 different times, then you just cherry pick whichever one you want. Oh, well, this one, it seemed like most people would shock people without any, right? And so you can choose the one that got the data that you wanted at the end of it, right? And is that fair? Is that good? You know, is that truth? Well, obviously, truth is so far down the ladder of the things that people are looking for here that it almost is inconsequential. Again, this was already 2005. They were talking about the replication crisis, and they said early 2010s they really started going for it and finding out about it. And I mean, it's running things now. It's still running things, and until the system stops working as it works, it's going to continue. And the fascinating thing, and the thing say that's positive, and I guess I will be positive this time. One-time positivity is that during this whole flu epidemic, people have been looking at and exchanging data and giving each other their stories, their empirical data, their stories about what's been happening. In other words, right from the beginning, I mean, Trump is like tweeting, hydroxychloroquine, try it, it might work, you know. And then other people are saying ivermectin, and Joe Rogan and doctors, and people are coming out and they're sharing and they're creating Telegram channels and they're creating Facebook channels. I mean, I was on this page of I think 100,000 people who were injured by the vaccine before they deleted it, right? But then they all went to Telegram. They went to various places. They're sharing information. They're making content. They're making videos and audios, and they're explaining what happened to them and for them, and they're sharing. And so what's happening is this whole financial-driven science system that is utterly broken and is utterly using people and is utterly just turning humans into money factories to get their cash before the people basically figure out. And geez, I mean, thalidomide. There's so many examples of stuff getting put out there, and then they keep putting it out there, and they really go for it. And even after they know damage is happening, even after they know people are dying, even after they know, they just keep going with it. And yeah, I mean, if you want to Google the most punished, largest fines ever, you will find the pharmaceutical companies right up there with giant, massive fines in so many ways, so many times. And it's just horrible. It's sad. It's wrong. It's scary. It's bad. It's and the fact that we just live this way and run this way and allow it to happen, allow it to exist, allow it to go as it's going was really sad for me. So I'm happy to see that people are actually sharing information now and sharing knowledge and saying, well, what does my doctor not know? Or what is my doctor being paid not to know? Unfortunately, this is what's happening. This is part of what is happening, right? What are people being paid not to say, not to do? Are they really paying people $3,000 if they put them on the ventilator? Are they really paying them money if it says died from COVID? You know, if so, like, how is this continuing? So how are we even doing this? How is this a society? How is this civilization not totally collapsing if it's based on that much error and that much evil and that much wrongdoing and that much corruption? Well, probably it isn't, and it won't be for very much longer. It's nearing its end. But yeah, seeing all these truckers piling up in Ottawa fighting their prime minister gives me some hope that I have not felt since I was at Occupy Wall Street in 2011, where we were actually trying to protest and change things, and where I learned a lot about freedom that I will be sharing on this recording eventually, on this podcast eventually. I had hope then, and I thought, yeah, if we didn't catch that, we never will. But now, 2 years into a pandemic, scamdemic, we are now starting to see other people popping up and saying, hey, well, maybe it's not the government who's going to protect me and take care of me. Maybe I have to do it myself. And maybe I can't trust these scientific results. Maybe I have to come up with results myself, and or talk to people, and or do my own research and figure out what's going on. I did a series of videos with someone who actually, she would go through the inserts, and there were these massive giant vaccine inserts that no one ever got to see. And we're not even talking and we're talking about normal, we're talking about just the childhood schedule that there was, and she would do that research, and then people would say, well, where did you find out about it? Says the person who's watching TV. Well, I go to my doctor. Well, how do you think your doctor was educated? Where do you think he got his information? How did the Rockefellers, the Rockefeller history of medicine, look for a book that talks about that, read that, and then come back to me and tell me how this all worked and how this got to this place. And yeah, so unfortunately, you may not be able to trust people in authority. You may need your own authority. You may need your own light to move forward in this world. And maybe a lot of people are lying to you. And it's unfortunate that they are, or they might be. But if that's how it is, wouldn't you rather know that it's happening and be able to deal with it than suffer because you don't know that it's happening? So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this kind of long ramble rant, as these tend to become, about police forensics and the replication crisis. And if you want to do extra things, you can Google the Central Park 5. You can look at the replication crisis. So many things to talk about. All right, all my love.